All righty. Well, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us here on Overflow. It's a beautiful Monday afternoon. If you're joining us live, we're super glad to have you live with us. But if you're watching back later, we're also glad to have you. And so if you're here live, feel free to type in the chat, say hello, and you can even ask questions throughout this. We'd love to interact with you. And so if you've got any questions to throw in, we'd love to hear from you. Today we have Aaron and myself, and we're going to be recapping a little bit of yesterday's sermon on Enneagram Type 3, as well as diving into our core sins and core struggles and core fears as part of our Enneagram types for today. And so, as always, our purpose with Overflow is to reflect on the sermon from the day before and to talk through how to practically engage with this material in our daily living. And so what we're learning should be changing how we're living. And that's really the purpose of Overflow, to kind of just help us walk through that. And so with that being said, since I gave the sermon yesterday, let me give a brief recap. So we talked about Enneagram Type 3. We talked about Jacob and Esau out of Genesis 25 through 30. Those are chapters. And we walked through how Jacob exhibits a lot of the Enneagram Type 3. In his earlier life, a lot of the unhealthiness of a 3. And in his later life, a lot more of the health. And so we see from a young age, he's very competitive. He's very goal-oriented. He's very ambitious, like the Type 3s. And he's wanting to achieve and accomplish and conquer. And he does so in an unhealthy way through manipulation, through deception, and basically whatever it would take in order for him to be successful. And that's one of the temptations of the Type 3s. They want to be successful, and they want to appear successful as well. It's not just being successful, it's appearing successful. They want to appear like they're accomplishing great things, they're achieving great things. And when they're unhealthy, they will go after their goals no matter the cost, no matter what it costs them, their relationships, the people that they hurt along the way. It doesn't matter. And so when they're healthy, they care less about appearing successful and more about actually having authenticity, character, and honesty in how they are. 3s in health are still visionary and hard workers, and they accomplish great things, but it's no longer rooted in their identity, where they need to be seen as a great achiever in order to be okay, in order to be loved. They know that they are loved by God, and they know that they are cared for and a forever part of God's family, and they don't have to achieve in order to earn that love, grace, and favor. So now, out of freedom, they get to be productive in authenticity with people and in relationships. So that's what we talked about. And so we're hoping that if you're 3, it was helpful and insightful. If you're a 2 or a 4 with a wing of a 3, that it was helpful and insightful, informative. If you're a 9 that goes towards a healthy 3 in your health, that you got some more clarity. And if you are a 6 and you go towards an unhealthy 3 in unhealth, that it made a little bit more sense for you, maybe some things that you relate to. And if you know a 3, if you have someone in your life who's ambitious and goal-oriented and always accomplishing great things, you understand them a little bit better, and you understand how they function and how they work and how God has uniquely made them. So with that, we're going to chat a little bit on Enneagram Type 3 and utilizing this for discipleship. And then we're going to jump into our weekly discussion questions about our own personal types, reflecting on fear and sin and shame and struggles. So Aaron, first question for you is just anything from the sermon that kind of stood out to you, that was helpful or kind of made some sense, or you just thought was interesting?
Yeah, I loved this week because I'm not
Is just anything. Oh, oops, so sorry about that.
getting
I
like
forgot to mute
like
something. Okay, you're good.
I know a lot of 3s in my life, so I'm not a 3, but I feel like I have a lot, or like 9s, because you said 9s go to 3 in health, right? And so
Yeah.
I feel like the perspective was just super good and helpful. Can you remind me, for those of us who aren't 3s, like the best ways to like show love to a 3, or like how can we better like relate to a 3?
Yeah. Some of the things, and I kind of like snuck some of these into the prayer because I missed them in the sermon portion. But a few of the ways to help love and care for our threes is, number one, affirm their efforts, their ambition, and their goals, and to acknowledge that they're working hard, that they're trying to accomplish something. So we want to affirm what they're working hard towards. But the second thing, which is kind of interesting, it's almost the opposite, is to express love, care, and acceptance for them, regardless of their accomplishments. So threes also need to be loved, cared for, acknowledged, and appreciated just for who they are. The wound of the three is feeling like they need to be recognized for their accomplishments in order to receive love, care, validation. And so part of loving them in a redemptive way is just loving them for who they are, not for anything that they do. And so you want to be careful. Sometimes you're going to want to tell your threes, like, hey, I really appreciate what you did here, or what you accomplished, or all that you've done, or how hard you've worked. You want it from that. But there's also needs to be times where you say, hey, I really appreciate you, or love you, or care about you, or I'm grateful for you just for being you, just for being here, regardless of what you do. And that's really what threes need. And the last thing is just, when you notice a three is going to unhealth and they're spiraling out of control, they are disconnected from everyone, and they're just super hard after their goals, is to really help with a loving intervention of helping to bring them to a place of health, and away from this like endless spiral of ambition that they get lost in. And so those are some, I think, key ways we can help to love them and encourage them.
See, that's super helpful, because I have a lot of threes in my life, work, home, and just like what you're saying about like acknowledging their hard work and their accomplishments, but then also like being intentional to show love just for who they are. Like I love how the Enneagram brings about like really practical, intentional like ways that we can just show love better. So like in the threes in my life, I'm already trying to think like, okay, when's the last time I affirmed this person for their great work? But then also, when's the last time I just sat with them and just enjoyed them, who they are, and just love them that way too. So that's super helpful. And then I thought it was interesting when you talked about, you talked about in your sermon, the childhood wound, right?
Yeah.
With a parent, you said something about like a parent, right? Or
yeah, like the wound of the three, because the Enneagram, part of its structure is based off of a childhood wound. And you could look at it either as a wound in your childhood helps to solidify your Enneagram type, or based on your Enneagram type, you're going to perceive something from your childhood as a wound. And so for the threes, it's feeling like they did not get the love, care, and attention and affection that they needed from their loved ones. So they needed to resort to accomplishing things in order to get that attention. And so that might have been trophies, that might have been grades, that might have been, a class that you took, or being in karate, or, sports or something, in order to achieve something great. And then to basically, either probably inadvertently kind of say, hey, do you see me? Do you notice me now? And do you love and appreciate me now that I've accomplished these things? And threes will learn over time. The more you accomplish, the more attention you get. And so they want to keep doing it.
Right. Yeah. See, that's so interesting for me to think about, because for me, the threes in my life, they're all very driven, super accomplished, like just people I admire so much. And it can be interesting because they, can be so focused on like accomplishing the next thing that even I can forget that, yeah, I just need to sit and also just be with you. And is all of my praise that I'm giving you, just in response to like these great things you're doing, or, so anyway, I really appreciated that perspective, because it really challenged me as not a three, to consider how I'm loving the threes in my life, and how I can do that better. And I really, really appreciated that perspective. I hadn't thought of it that way before.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like, if you sit down for a conversation with a three, likely they will spend some time telling you about their accomplishments in some form or another. They'll find a way to tell you what they've been up to. And really, they're going to want like some recognition, but they're going to act like they don't want it. Kind of like the twos. They're ready to help everyone, but they don't really need help from anybody else, but secretly they really want help from someone else, And so threes, it's like, oh, I'm not accomplishing these things for praise, but I am, like, so they're going to want that. But at the same time, we really want to affirm our threes when rather than pointing us towards all that they're doing, if threes are opening up about their struggles, about where they're falling short, we got to really affirm that a lot, because that is one of the hardest things for a three to do, is to be vulnerable about their failures. Because for them, that's shameful. For them, being seen as inadequate, unable to accomplish something is very difficult. And so if a three is moving towards health, they're going to be more honest and authentic in sharing their failures and sharing their struggles. And so we got to just affirm that and acknowledge that and empathize and hear them, and just give them support in that, because that's a big growth area for them. So
yeah, that's all super helpful. I just I thought that was really great, and that really stood out to me.
Yeah, well, I think one of the other things that stood out was how easy it is for threes to put on a mask of success to the outside world. Inside, they might be failing and struggling and falling apart. And so I think just creating space for threes to have a relationship that's safe for them to share where they're struggling or falling apart is also really important for our threes that we know. Maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a fellow classmate, or a student of yours, or a neighbor. And normally they seem to be really ambitious and they've got a lot of things going, but you notice something's a little off, or you notice they're struggling. Giving them a safe space to just share where they're struggling is meeting a really important need in their life. And so I think that's one way that we can really be Christ to our threes and to others, is to just really be there and be that safe space for them with love and acceptance.
Love that. That's super good.
So let's jump into reflecting on our own type. So part is our life group discussion for the week, or if you're just kind of reflecting on the discussion questions on your own or with some friends, all these are on nl-cc.org/Enneagram. And you just go to the discussion guide, which is at the top of step 3. And so last week we talked about positive attributes, contributions, and strengths of your type. And so this week we're going to talk about your core fear, your core struggle, and your core sin. And so these we've characterized as the negative attributes. Every type has positive and negative attributes. Some of us tend to focus more on the positives. Some of us focus more on the negatives. What's important to understand about today's discussion is these are going to carry some significant influence into how we function in the world and with others and in relationship, what we're doing, what we're not doing. These really affect us. And so, the purpose of today is to really talk about what is your type and what are these different pieces. So we're going to start off with question 1, which talks about your core fear. What is your core fear? Reflect on it. And how does it seem to affect you? So, Aaron, you are a type 1. And so, what is your core fear, the thing that you are trying to avoid or stay away from as a type 1?
Yeah. So a type 1's core fear is criticism, right? Because type 1's kind of view the world and they have a very big awareness of what is good or better or best in their mind, right? And so my biggest fear, and even it's funny to do something like this and know like it's on YouTube, like people are gonna be watch back and get to hear me talk about my biggest fear, right? Like just all the things, it's kind of a vulnerable thing. But so the core fear of an Enneagram 1 is criticism. And Enneagram 1s always want to do the right thing and the best thing and the perfect thing. And actually the core fear is one of the ways that I finally was able to discern that I'm a type 1, because I talked a little bit a couple weeks ago about how I was mistyped for a while, and I thought I was a 2. And the thing is, when I talked about the core fear of a 2, it didn't like hurt like it does when I talk about the 1, right? So it was like, oh yeah, people please, like, or it's not people pleasing, but whatever it was just like, oh yeah, that could be me. But like when I talk about a fear of criticism, it's like I feel that. Right. Like I feel how like in a situation, if I'm presenting a paper for a class or whatever it might be, right, I approach the situation with a natural worldview of like expecting criticism, right? So I even try to like pre-expect it, like what do I think the criticism of this might be, so that I could fix it now so that I don't experience that. And I never even realized that not everybody does that. But for me, it's like I'll look at something and I can see the weak points and I'll expect criticism. Like I think I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but like a lot of people, when they have work, they present it like this. And oftentimes I present it like this, just like waiting for someone to tell me everything that is wrong with it. And so for me, that's kind of how my core fear, but then also needing to balance that with like the value of having the feedback of others. Right. And so for me, part of the journey has been understanding that feedback from others isn't necessarily criticism, or constructive criticism is a good thing. Right. And learning to be better. And we need other people to speak into what we're doing and who we are and what we're producing in order to like make things even better. And so, yeah, but I can be very self-critical, and then I kind of project that onto others, and I expect that others are going to be critical of me as well. So as a 1, that's kind of how my core fear manifests itself.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And I love that you said that, when you first tested, you were kind of mistyped a little bit into 2, which you found out later was actually a wing and not like your core. And part of what brought you clarity was the core fear. And I think that's so true. A lot of times we can read the strengths or the positive attributes and we can say like, oh yeah, I think this is me, or yeah, this is me, but it's not. And it's who we want to be, or who we hope will be, or who some people think we are. But then when we navigate like the core fear and sin, it's like there's just more clarity there of like, oh yeah, I really don't like this, And I like to kind of ask the question based on your type, what would like be the worst case scenario? Like what would hell look like for you, in a sense, like hell on earth, not like actual hell, but just like what would be a horrible situation to be in, and that kind of helps to reveal. And so for me, I'm a type 7. And it says our core fear is being deprived of joy or pleasure, and being trapped in a cage, and being in pain. And so that's really the fear of a 7. And it's funny, I'm talking to my wife even yesterday, and she's just laughing at me. She's like, this is exactly you, And what's interesting is 7s are in the thinking center. And so 7s are very intellectual, actually. And so I spend a lot of my time thinking strategically on how to avoid pain and create free opportunities to go with whatever I feel like doing. Like, to me, that's like my favorite day. Like, if I can just have a day that's like not necessarily super planned out, but like I have a few loose plans of like what I want to do, and I can just go with whatever I feel like doing and explore and just like adjust and just like go with whatever, like that sounds wonderful. But to be like caged in and locked in and like, this is what you have to do, and this is how you have to do it, and this is the way you need to go about this, and like, to me, is so constricting and just so overwhelming. So to feel like I'm locked in a cage physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, to feel like I don't have the freedom to do things or to color outside of the lines, to feel like I'm trapped, and to feel like I am not allowed to experience joy or pleasure would just be like the worst thing. And joy and pleasure, it doesn't have to be these like lavish experiences. Like, you don't need to travel to Greece for that. Like, it can just be like the pleasure of going on a walk on a sunny day with a light, cool breeze. It's just like, that's just good. Or just listening to music, or going on a bike ride, or eating a snack I like, or just being with somebody that I enjoy. Like, it can be really light and really simple. But I think what's interesting about core fear is it really influences the decisions I make. And so ultimately, if I'm being really honest with myself, I have to say I'm really making this decision out of my fear to be trapped in something I don't want to be in. So there might be somebody that I meet, and they're kind of like, hey, we should get together and we should meet. And if I perceive that person as going to be like a burden on me and going to be like life sucking, or it's just like not an ideal relationship, I'm going to think like, get out, run away, don't get trapped in this. This is a bad experience. And so, or if I see this person as like, hey, I think this person would be fun, or it'd be good to hang out with them or whatever, I'm going to think, hey, this is going to be a fun opportunity. There's going to be joy. Like, yeah, we need to hang out. Let's do it tomorrow. What are you doing right now? Like, and so it's just interesting how, based on my fear, I make a lot of decisions. And I think being aware of that is really important to understand why I do what I do. And if I'm trying to live a more Christ-like life, I can't live out of that fear, but I've got to be more trusting to God. And so I think that's something that I'm learning. Okay, so that's core fear. Let's talk about core sin. And so we've talked a little bit about how there's some history with the 7 deadly sins, and that kind of got morphed into the 9 types to some degree. And so each type has a sin that they struggle with. And I've kind of said in like the intro video for the week that it doesn't mean this is your only sin, and it doesn't mean that this is like your worst sin. But this is like a go-to sinful struggle that usually our types identify with. And so for you, Erin, what's your core sin as a 1, and how do you relate to that?
Yeah, so I remember, I talked about this a little bit in my sermon a few weeks ago, but I remember when we were all sitting around, we walked through each type, we were planning out the sermon series, you and me and Ryan Bogert. And the core sin of Enneagram 1 is anger. And I remember reading that and being like, nah, like, I don't, like, it's really easy to say, like, I don't like that. I don't think it's right. I think the wording's wrong, right? Because it kind of hurt again. Like, it's like, I feel like that's one of the way you know your types is when you look at the core sin and like, if you're really considering in your life, it hurts, right? It hurts. And it's like, you want to like push that away and you want to say, no, that's not true. And so for an Enneagram 1, the core sin is anger. But what I don't like about the connotation is that it doesn't mean that Enneagram 1s walk around angry all the time. I wouldn't call myself an angry person. I don't know that many people necessarily see me angry or see me in that way, I hope. And so what it means for me as an Enneagram 1, the core sin being anger, is that oftentimes I can be like resentful, like I can hold on to things. I can be very overly critical, right? All of these things can kind of be a manifestation of like this anger, because it's like for a 1, if you're hyper aware of goodness or rightness, when you see things that you perceive as not being good or right, it can lead to anger, and like that can be just a very natural like disposition. And so I think for me, just kind of being aware of that and then understanding that like there are times when it is appropriate to be angry. I think it's appropriate to be angry at things that make God angry, or injustice, or things that are wrong. But a lot of times, most of the time, I think for a 1, anger is going to be something that's going to lead to bitterness or resentment, or just not being, if you forgive someone, like not being able to let it go, but like you should be letting it go, things like that. And so for me as a 1, the core sin being anger, I think there's like a lot of nuance and discussion about like how that manifests for a 1, and probably looks different for different people.
Yeah, I kind of liked how you said that, like, everyone's going to get angry at different things. And sometimes there are just reasons for our anger, and sometimes there's unjust reasons. And the biblical approach is really what you do with that anger. I think about the scripture that says, be angry and do not sin. So it's like, okay, we can get angry, but what we do in response really dictates if that's sin or not. And it sounds like what you're saying is the 1s have a harder time letting that anger go. And it's kind of like 1s hold on to that a little bit more, and it can evolve into resentment or bitterness kind of over time. And so, yeah, I think that's really interesting. Yeah, I don't see you as like this angry person that's always, a tyrant going around being angry. But I do notice that your response to a bad situation is usually getting upset about it, right? And I think that can be a good and powerful thing, because we need to get upset about injustice and things that are wrong, and so but yeah, I think that's, so thanks for sharing on that. The type 7 core sin is gluttony, which is basically going after pleasure more and more and more and more. And so if you look at the unhealth, like on Enneagram Institute, they have like the 9 levels of health, and like level 1 is like perfection, and level 9 is like the most despair, the worst place you can be. And it's literally like 7s become drug addicts is basically like what it says. Like 7's the most common type for addictive issues. And because 7s enjoy the experience of pleasure, that they start to go like, well, I want a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And they go after that. And it's really easy for them, especially in unhealth, to just go after anything and everything like that. And so gluttony at the end of the day really is when you are embracing something not for like what it is or who they are, but for what they can give you, and so when food is no longer about like nutrition for my body, but it's about just like making me feel better, or a relationship is no longer about loving someone or respecting someone or vice versa, it's about what I can get from them. An experience is not about like, hey, we're gonna go do this traveling with my family for some quality time. It's about like, I want to feel good, I want to feel excited, I want to like have fun, and so gluttony is when we kind of go to these feelings and these experiences for pleasure, and we want more and more and more, but we lose the value of like who people are and what things are about. And so it's very easy for the seven to just overindulge things and in good things. I think a seven could be amazing, like an amazing triathlete, but they just love the pleasure of working out so much that they are just like dove in. And to a degree, they can be really healthy physically, but they've gone to a point where they are just really addicted to something else, even if it's a good thing. And so I think I've kind of mentioned like even approaching God's presence, like we should desire to like be in God's presence, and God's presence is a blessing to us, and there is pleasure in God's presence. But sevens can become addicted to spiritual experiences and environments just because we want to feel good, not because we necessarily want to like give God praise or glory. And so yeah, that's really the core sin of the seven. So knowing that, I'm thinking through, how does this affect the choices I make? What are my go-to things, like coping mechanisms, and why are they that way, and should they be there, and am I really valuing people and things for what they are or just what they can give me? And so I think sevens become very self-indulgent when they're unhealthy, but become very generous and sharing when they're really healthy. So yeah. Any other, for our last few minutes here, any other struggles that your type tends to struggle with, or anything that you would consider like a negative attribute, something that's hard or that you have to overcome or that's difficult to do?
Yeah, I actually I was just reading a book this morning, and I hear a lot the type ones, for me, they described as seeing the world in black and white. Um and I feel like I've always resisted that descriptor for a long time, but I can see how it's true in my life in some ways. But like, I think one of the biggest things about the Enneagram for me is like learning that not everybody sees things the same, approaches things the same. And then in daily life, when if I'm on a team and we're approaching a situation, and understanding that like someone else's view is, they might view it differently than me, it doesn't mean that they are wrong or bad. Like, so I think it's a natural reflex of mine. If someone disagrees with something, just say like, oh, well, that's wrong, right? But if I'm moving toward health, then I'm going to sit with that person and I'm going to try to understand their perspective in a deeper way. Right. And I'm going to accept that like my way isn't necessarily the only way. Not that I always think that, but it can be my natural disposition of like, here's the right way, let's do it. Right. Versus like, so I think sometimes ones can struggle with there being more than one good way to do something, and doing someone else's way. If it might be their default, just be like, here's the right way, let's go. But stopping to consider that someone else's perspective, everyone else's perspective is valid. And then, like really taking that into account and being flexible in that way, and not really living in that black and white. And I do know a lot of ones, and they're healthy and they don't live in that black and white. Right. And I think that's where my struggle is a lot of times ones get described as just living in the black and white, just seeing things for this way or that way. But I do think a challenge, but a healthy challenge for a one is to move beyond that and kind of see various perspectives and be able to put themselves in the shoes of someone else. So that's kind of something I've been thinking about lately with as far as like Enneagram ones.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. I think for me, as I think about this, one of the classic struggles of the type 7 is negative emotions. And I know I've shared on that in different pieces, but it's like sevens move from like good experience to good experience so fast that they don't take the time to process or even feel kind of like the negative emotion of what happened. And so that's one of the things that I'm working on, is how to sit with negative emotions, or even just how to sit with grief or sadness, or just what I would normally feel as like a hint of sadness and I would quickly move past, like allowing myself and encouraging myself to sit in a little bit longer, and just to say like, hey, this thing is finishing and it's okay to be a little bit sad. And I'm not going to make myself sad, but just giving myself permission to just kind of feel that for a little bit. I feel like most all of my life it's been like, hey, I'm kind of bummed about this. All right, next. And just kind of like, what else am I on to, And so it's like, I don't got time to just sit around and wallow in my sadness. Like, who cares about that? Like, I want to go do something cool. And so, but just understanding that part of being healthy is being able to sit in the struggles or the sadness or the pain, or, if even for a little bit. I'm not going to like hang out there for forever. But I don't want to just like wash it away so quickly. And so I know that part of my temptation as I move from joy to joy to joy is to miss like the struggles, and a lot of love and compassion and care and forgiveness and healing happens through struggle, and so I think a lot of what God has for us in this life, we can actually only experience in struggle. So much of the biblical kind of concept of like hardship is like how God meets us in those hardships. And so if I'm always neglecting what is difficult, then I'm robbing myself of experiencing God in pain, which is so much of the scripture, so much of the Psalms, so much of the whole narrative of scripture. The gospel, God meets us in our sin and redeems us. And if I'm just so caught up in all the positives and I don't take time to acknowledge the pain, I'm going to miss a big part of what God has for me. And so that's definitely something that I'm working on and learning through this process.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're thinking that, when you were saying that, it got me thinking for me as a one, when you're talking about um, just the way that God relates to us in those core sins, core fears. As a one, I because I can be like, sometimes it's hard for me to receive and give grace. I think that's something out of a one, and like, but realizing that because of that, when I do allow myself to experience God's grace and to give it freely, it's such a powerful experience, right? And so like letting God speak into those core, I don't know, core blind spots, I guess, those core spaces that are just harder for us, whatever our individual types are. But when we intentionally pursue God in those spaces, just like what a powerful experience it can be in our own lives, and then also in our ministry to others. It's really cool.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think that's a great thought. Um, yeah, well, that's kind of it for today. And so thanks so much for joining us. Would you be thinking through and reflecting on your type, your core sins and struggles and fears this week, and how you relate to them? Thinking through those might help you, give you some clarity on which type is yours, but also hopefully will give you some clarity on why you do some of the things you do. And so, as always, our purpose of the whole series is to become more like Jesus. And so, the better we know and understand ourselves, the better we're going to accurately surrender to God and invite his redemption and healing and restoration in our lives. And so, yeah, hope this is helpful and encouraging, and we will see you next Monday at noon. So, see you later.